Welcome back to the Invest in Yourself podcast. Today I'm joined by ex-Mafia associate Larry Rolla. Larry was a big-time horse race fixer back in the day. Larry knew many mob guys and he helped them fix races. One very major mob figure he met when he was young was Tommy Lucchese, the boss of the Lucchese crime family that we're all familiar with. Larry wrote a book named Horse Racing and the Mob. I highly recommend this book to anyone that loves Mafia-related content. The link is in the video description. Please subscribe to my channel for more interviews like this, and without further ado, let's get into Larry's story. All right, Larry, how you doing this morning, man?
I'm doing fine.
Well, thank you for coming on, man. I really enjoyed your book.
No, thank you. My pleasure being here.
Yeah, well, I think you have a really interesting book, like I said. So that's where we'll go off today. We're going to talk about your early life up until now. And, you got a really good story about being connected with a lot of mafia guys and ultimately getting involved with horse racing for, that was your passion. But I mean, before, you got into all that, what, kind of talk about your early life. I mean, because, you even at an early time, you had even met Tommy Lucchese and stuff too. So that'll be another thing we'll get to.
Well, my early life is I grew up in the typical Italian neighborhood, an Italian family in an Italian neighborhood, and on a street where every house had one or two kids, and naturally, every other Italian neighborhood, they had gangs and they had the mob hanging out there, and you just kind of graduate. It's like going to kindergarten, and then the second grade, third grade. By the time you're in high school, you're an associate, and that's basically how it goes. And some kids gravitate to that, and I did for a while, but my whole thing with that changed. One night I was in a diner, and I was hanging out with a gang in Corona, Queens, and all tough guys, another mob infested area. And that's where I was heading, just like all the other kids, 14, 15, 16. You get in the car, you just go look for fights and everything. And one day we were sitting in the diner one night, maybe it was 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. And we were all just like every other night, all bloodied up and everything because of fighting other gangs and just looking for fights, just stupid stuff. And I was sitting there just covered with blood. My nose was broke again. One of my teeth were out. And somebody hit me with a bat over the head. And I didn't enjoy that. I didn't enjoy fighting. I really didn't enjoy that. My main thing was I love music. I love racing cars and girls. And I started building cars right around that age. And stock cars, I raced at Freeport. The stock car, and I built the dragster and a roadster that I raced at West Hampton, and that's what I really enjoyed. And I made up my mind that night that I was done with that. I didn't enjoy it, and I didn't enjoy following the leader. I just wanted to do my own thing. I wanted to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it, and that was basically it.
Yeah, and I know that even Tommy Lucchese from your book, you had mentioned that he had came to you personally and wanted to straighten you out, right?
Well, he didn't come to
Not
me personally.
not to straighten you out, but I mean to get you away from that life.
Yeah, I when I start racing cars, you blow an engine or you blow a clutch, you have to get money to repair them, and I had no money, and so I was starting to do bad things. I was starting to rob gas stations and everything. I did whatever I had to do to get enough money to repair the damage that whatever I did to the car. And one day, I blew an engine on the dragster that I was racing at West Hampton, and I needed about $300-400. Now, when I was robbing these gas stations, you get $30-40 tops. So I was looking for a big score, and I saw a gas station that was having a grand opening. They had all brand new tires and big sign out front, and they had all these new transmission jacks because during them years the the all the cars were switching to automatic transmission, so they had these new jacks because they weighed like 150, 200 pounds. So they had all these new jacks. Anyway, I that was my spot. And the night before, I robbed a box truck, and what I had to do is I had to get somebody to help me because them transmission jacks, I couldn't lift them up by myself. So I got a partner, and we robbed the gas station. He had somebody to buy the stuff we robbed, and we sold it. We whacked up the money, and everything was good. I got the engine for the car, and about 3-4 weeks later, I got a knock on the door. It was Detective Sands from 114 precinct. And they dragged me down to the precinct and upstairs to the detective's room, and they had a confession there with everything that I robbed. They already had. They found it somehow, and they asked me to sign the confession and give up the guy I was with, and I refused to do it. And he come around the desk, he slapped me, and like a young jerk, I hit him in the belly. Then the other detectives, and they handcuffed me to the back of the room, the back of the chair. And Detective Sands went and got one of the big law books and pounded me on the head with it. And then they uncuffed me and asked me to sign it, and I wouldn't sign it. By then, my eyes were bleeding, my nose, my ears, everything. And they hit me again. I fell on the floor and crawled into the corner. They jumped me on. Bottom line was they threw me down in the tombs. I woke up in the tombs, 3 cells down at the precinct in the basement. And they left me there a couple of days. Monday, they took me to the courthouse on Queens Boulevard. My mother bailed me out. And I says I was all busted up, my clothes full of dried blood in my ears and my nose, everything. It was a mess. And I says, Ma, you got to get me to the hospital. I can't breathe. And what happened was they were jumping on my ankles. They hit my ribs with the long pole that they had at the precinct to pull up the windows. And I wind up with 4 or 5 broken ribs, a broken ankle, a concussion. And anyway, she says, when we left the courthouse, she says, I'm taking you where I should have taken you years ago, because I was just a bad kid. My mother was a good woman that was completely frustrated with me. No matter, I was the only thing she ever failed at, just because I was just a stupid, defiant kid. So she at that time, she ran all Tommy Lucchese's dress factories. And so she took me up to see him. And he said to me, he asked my mother to leave the room, and he just simply said to me, he said, listen, he says, your mother's a good woman, and she's my friend, and you're breaking her heart with all your nickel and dime bullshit. So I'm asking you to go home and think about what I said. And if you want to straighten your life out, I will help you in every way that I can. And all this bullshit will go away, including the problem you have right now. And from that point on, I became a legitimate kid. I really did. I became 100% legitimate. And I went and got a legitimate job in a gas station where he allowed me to leave my cars there and fix them, and use his tools and his lift. And it was great. And one day a horse van pulled in, and he asked me fill it up with gas, and he asked me for a bucket of water. I worked the night shift. And I asked him, I said, what are you doing with them horses? He said, I'm going to Yonkers Raceway. I race them. And through a conversation, I found out that you could race horses for money versus what I was racing my cars for, blankets and trophies. So, and that's what led me to rob and steal and everything. But so that sounded very appealing to me. He invited me out to the farm, and that was the beginning of my horse career at the age of probably 18. Okay. I went up to the farm. I never went back.
Okay. So a few things before we keep moving forward is the police brutality back then. Damn, I mean that was horrible. I mean, you would never expect cops to do that nowadays, or a lot of that stuff goes on. But I mean, that is a whole different time and an era.
Well, yeah, back then you there was no such thing as you have the right to an attorney Back then, the first thing you did, well, in my case anyway, you sit down, they bring you up to the detective's room, and they take a pair of pliers out, and they put it on the desk, and they take your hand. If you have nails, I didn't have no nails. That's why I got beat. But normally they just attach the pliers to one of your nails and pull it out if you don't do what they say. Or they take you in the back outside the precinct in the back, and they just beat the shit out of you. And that's what they did. I wasn't the only one. They did it all the time. That's what they did. And it was pretty brutal. And you could never sue them. You could never win. You could never do nothing. You just, and I just accepted it,
Yeah, I mean, because you just went to Tommy. Your mom took you there to Tommy, and he just
Yeah,
basically told you can make it all go away, and as long as you
yeah,
stay straight. And so he really took an interest in you, and just because of the fact that him and your mother had a very close relationship, and I mean, I don't. I mean, that's for him to go above and beyond for you. I mean, he did, and you were able to go straight after that point while you were a kid, and so you ended up navigating to the racetrack. So let's continue there. You said you just got there, and this was your first gig as a horse racer.
yeah. I don't know how much time we have, so I'll breeze right through everything and
Okay.
leave a lot of stuff out. And then if you want, you could fill in the blanks later
Yeah.
on, whatever questions you have. Yeah, I went out to the farm, and within a year, I paid it. I love the horses, and I love the competition. That was my main. I don't know which I love better, the music or the racing. Third, girls came third. They weren't even on my mind back then. I just love to race. I love the competition, and the racing horses was even more exciting to me than racing the cars. Plus the fact that you can't fall in love with a fender, but or a bumper, but you can fall in love with a horse, and it became a way of life that I really wanted to live. And as long as I had Sinatra playing on the speakers and I had the horses there, I was great. And every few days, a girl would pop into your life, and everything was fine. So I wind up getting my license to train and drive harness horses. This was harness horses now. This was not the thoroughbreds. It was harness racing. And I got my license to train and drive, and I loved it, and I was good at it. I paid attention to everything, the finer points of every part of the game, including the anatomy of a horse, how to recognize lameness, how to treat lameness, how to keep a horse sound in both body and mind. And I loved it. That's what I wanted to do the rest of my life. And I was 100% legitimate. And basically, looking back, sometimes when you're laying there in bed in the middle of the night and think about all the heartache I caused my mother through them years. But anyway, I get a call one day from my mother, and this is after I came back from the first track I ever went to was Buffalo with Mike Foley, the guy who had the horse van, who taught me everything. And the first place I went to with him was Buffalo Racetrack, and it was up there that I qualified for my license, and I got it. So when we came back to New York, I called my mother and I said, "Ma," I says, "I'm back home. I got my license up there. I had 10 satisfactory drives in races, and the judge gave me my license." And now, so she was very happy. It was the first time in my life that she got a call from me that was a positive call, that I wasn't busted up or in jail or something. So she was very happy. And she called me the next day, and she said, "I told Tommy Lucchese about you, and he gave me something to give to you. So get home, and I'll give it to you." And when I got there the following day, she gave me an envelope, and there was $20,000 in it from Tommy Lucchese,
Damn.
with a message saying, "Congratulations, good luck to you. Do whatever you have to do with this money, and if you need more, just let me know." Well, I bought 4 horses right away with the money and all the equipment I needed, and I applied for stalls. I got the stalls. In fact, I'll just tell you real briefly the power that Lucchese had back then. I applied for stalls at Roosevelt Raceway, the first time in my life ever. And I was all excited about it. And I get a letter back a week later. They denied me stalls. And just so you know, Roosevelt Raceway and Yonkers Raceway were the two biggest racetracks in the country for harness racing. And all the top drivers and trainers and the best horses in the country race there. So I says to Mike Foley, I says, they denied me stalls. And he says, well, you kind of have to expect that. They don't know who you are. It's a premier racetrack. You're a brand new kid. They don't know you. And you're just going to have to work your way up, which means go to all these small out-of-town tracks in the middle of nowhere and develop some kind of reputation and a little experience, and then come back and apply. So I called up my mother and I said, Ma, I says, they denied me stalls here. I says, and I didn't know what to do. I was brand new at this, and they telling me I have to go to Hinsdale and Delaware, and I says, and I don't know what to do. So she says, well, I don't know what to do neither. Anyway, now I'm trying to figure out what tracks to go to, the out of town tracks. And my mother calls me back and she says, I spoke to Tommy Lucchese about this, and you can go to Roosevelt. There's 4 stalls waiting for you. So I said, how did he do that? And she says, well, Roosevelt Raceway at the time was owned by Morton Levy. Morton Levy was the attorney for Frank Costello and Lucky Luciano and all of them mob guys. So he was an attorney. He's a wealthy guy, and he owned a racetrack. So all it took was a phone call, and they treated me like a king, and they let me drive there, which was another thing I didn't know I was not able to do. They didn't allow. I had a provisional license. And they only allowed top drivers, A drivers, to drive there. But because of Tommy Lucchese, they allowed me to drive there.
Damn. So he had his power and connections just to help you. I mean, what?
Well, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, they even some part in the 80s, they controlled that. They controlled everything. The judges, they controlled everything. It's sad to say, but that's reality. That's the way it was. So I had him anytime. It was just great. It's great to have somebody like that on your side. I think I won seven out of my first 8 or 9 races, and they gave me a full page write-up, and things really started to happen good for me. After the write-up, the phone was ringing. Plus, I won the first 7 or 8 races that I was in, and everybody was talking about me. And I got phone calls. People wanted to give me the horses, invest a lot of money, and everything else. And I was really doing well. I went from a stumble-bum kid that racing stock cars to having full-page write-ups, racing against the top guys in the country. And then I went to Yonkers, and Yonkers Raceway. I was the owner of the track was Marty Tannenbaum. He was very, very. I found all this out later. He was very, very politically involved with the Democratic Party and just a wheeler, dealer, schemer, and really not a nice guy. He wound up going to jail too for many, many things, embezzling. I'm talking about tens of millions of dollars. But anyway, I didn't know that at the time. He was the owner of a racetrack, but he was partners with one of the big gamblers down there, and another guy called Morty Finder. And Morty Finder, and they used to bet together. They put up maybe 10, 20,000 every night. And Morty was the gambler. He would bet. And Morty was partners with him. So one night I had a horse in. I just come from Roosevelt, and I had a horse in that had won 3 in a row. So between that horse winning 3 in a row, but he was moving up in company, and racing against a lot tougher horses. And I finished 3rd, climbing over horses. I got hopelessly locked in. I finished 3rd, climbing over horses at the finish line. And naturally, Morty Finder, who was the better, they bet 10,000 to win on me that night. And Morty, naturally, like any other gambler, he made an excuse for him losing. He said, "The kid stiffed the horse. The kid stiffed the horse." And that's what I wasn't. I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I went back to the paddock after the race, and I got paged to come to the judge's office, and they gave me 24 hours to get off the grounds. Tannenbaum accused me of stiffing the horse, which I really didn't do. I really did not do.
Damn.
Um,
So
I,
this is when you were legit with,
I was 100% legit. I loved doing what I was doing, and would never ever do anything to jeopardize that. Not only that, but I gave Tommy Lucchese my word. Plus, I took his money. I would never do that, and I was accused of doing it. So I called my mother and I said, "Ma, they threw me out of the track, and because of reciprocity, all the major racetracks, you're barred from there automatically because of reciprocity." So I says, "Could you ask Tommy if he could do something?" And she says, "I can't bother him now because he's in the hospital with a malignant brain tumor, and I can't bother him." So for the next three years, I went to all the small tracks, and like I said, I'm skimming right along. I won't get into everything. I'll just say that for the next 3 years, I basically starved to death. It got to the point where after I lost whatever money I made, um, during my days at Yonkers and Roosevelt, it was all gone, and pretty soon, me and the other grooms that were at the racetrack were catching pigeons and cooking pigeons, and that's what we eat, and that's how bad it got. No money, no nothing, and just made sure the horses got fed and taken care of. It was probably the worst 3-4 years of my life.
to go from being at the top to just
Yeah,
going like that, like nothing,
yeah,
man.
and then you lay in the tack rooms at night where you live, because you live at the track, and you're hungry and you're broke and you have nothing, and you think about what you just lost, and it gets to you, it gets you sick, and that's what happened. That's what happened to me. So one day, but I love the game. I figure, well, maybe someday, I'll get reinstated. Let me just go make the rounds and keep doing what I was doing. Plus, the horses that I had, I bought, they were $4, $5, $10,000 horses, and at these small racetracks, I couldn't even sell the horses because Tommy Lucchese died a year after that happened. And I think he died maybe 2 years after I got barred from Yonkers. He died the following year of brain cancer. So I was on my own, and it was just hopeless. And as much as I loved the game, I was starving to death, and I saw no future. But I couldn't even sell the horses because the people at these small racetracks have no money, and half the horses I had couldn't even get raced because they were better than the horses that at the tracks I was at. They wrote no races for them. In other words, in layman terms, I'll just make it simple. If I had a horse that was a $10,000 claimer, they never wrote $10,000 claim. It only went up to 3,000. So half my horses I couldn't even race, and I just stabled them and took care of them. But anyway, one day, it was in 1970, I think it was, they opened up a brand new racetrack. It wasn't a new racetrack. It was a place called Lincoln Downs in Boston. And it was the first time ever they tried harness racing there. They were always racing thoroughbreds at all them Boston racetrack. So I applied for stalls there because the purses would double. Then the purse money that you won was doubled in the places where I was at. And I got stalls. So the first day, opening day, I have 2 horses in, and both morning line favorites. And I'm sitting in the barn. I had finished my work. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'm just waiting for the races to start. And I'm looking at the program, and down the shed row comes 3 gigantic guys, 3 big guys. They look like the front line of the Chargers. And they're all 6.5 feet tall, 300 pounds. And they come up to me and they said, "You Larry Rolla?" And I says, "Yes." And he says, "Well, my name is Tony Shula. I'm with the Winter Hill Gang and Whitey Bulger, and we control all these racetracks around here. And if you're interested in making money, we can do that. So that was like, I just wanted to kiss the guy. I mean, you go through 4 years of starvation, and then all of a sudden they tell you you want to make some money. The answer is yes. And the purse money was not great, even though it was better. It's still, you're racing for $1,000. So if you win, you get 50% of the 1,000, which is 500. But the owner gets the 500. Now, and you as the trainer get 5% of that. As a driver, you get 5%. But it wasn't bad because the horses I had in, I owned them. So anyway, he makes the deal. I says, what you have in mind? He says, you have 2 morning line favorites in. He said, I'll give you 200 a horse, and tell me what stall he's in. My vet will come, it'll take care of him, and you'll just be up the track without hurting your horse. And he said it like in like he was a tough guy, a wise guy, which I guess he was, but I grew up around that shit, It didn't faze me. None of that stuff bothered me.
Did you know he was with Whitey Bulger then? I mean, did you know who the Winter Hill Gang was back then?
Oh, I didn't know who the Winter Hill Gang was, but I knew who Whitey Bulger was. Because when you get involved in that kind of stuff, and you wind up with at a very young age, Tommy Lucchese, you start looking into all of that stuff. And yeah, I didn't know. I heard the name. I didn't really know who he was. I found out later who he was and how bad he was. But at that time, I just heard the name Whitey Bulger because when I was talking with a friend of mine, and I says, yeah, I'm going up to Lincoln Downs. He says, that's Whitey Bulger's place. And then he told me a little bit about Whitey Bulger. But none of that stuff bothered me. What do I care? It didn't make a difference to me.
Yeah.
So
you ended up doing it for him, right?
Well, I said to him, I says, listen, I says, I own these horses. I said, if I win, I get $500. I says, you want to give me the 500? I says, for each horse, and leave your vet home. I says, because whatever, my word is better than anything your vet can give my horse. And he says, 500? And I says, yeah. I says, because both horses could win. You want me to finish worse than third, and you want to give me 200. I ain't doing it. And he says, do you know who the fuck you're talking to? And I says, it really don't make a difference who I'm talking to. You want a deal? That's the deal. So he's counting out the 500, and he counts out $1,000. He gave me 500 for each horse, just like I asked. And he says, I hope you know what the fuck you're doing, because I'll be back in the morning. And I says, good. When you come, I want coffee with no sugar and a bagel with cream cheese. And sure enough, the next morning, he came there with the coffee and the bagel, and he was happy. He won a lot of money.
Damn. How much did he win?
And then he said to me, I don't know how much you win. I didn't care. All I know is I got my 1,000, and I still had the horse. And next week he's going to be in. He's going to be a higher price, and I could win with him there at a higher price. And it was non-taxable money. It was money I got right away. It was money in my pocket right away. And the first thing I did that night was go out and have a gigantic steak dinner. So anyway, he comes back the next day with my coffee and bagel, and he says, good job. He says, you think you can get anybody else that we can do business with? Now, at the smaller racetracks, they try to fix races amongst themselves, and they're all broke. Half of them are living in tack rooms, got no money, and they just do it for the love of the horses, whether they were born into it or whatever. So getting somebody to do what I did was easy. So within a week, I had 7, 8 guys, and we wind up making a lot of money. Now, one day, after about a month, we're doing very well, and he comes back the next day. Now, he says to me, he says, as he's walking away, he says, listen, he says, I got an edge on some hoops tonight. He says, you want any action? And at that time, I didn't even know what hoops were. But I found out later that he was fixing college basketball games. So I says, look, whatever you do for you, do for me. I didn't know anything about it. And so he comes back the next day, he gives me $3,000. I think it was $3,000. And he says, here, I did for you. So that was my first experience in sports betting. So he comes the next day and he says, listen, I got a couple of games tonight. You want to do the same thing? And the next day he comes back with 5,000. And it got to the point that where I was making more money with his hoop games than we were fixing races, because I was just getting 500 a horse. That's all I was getting, and I was getting a piece of the other action. I was making more money with his college games. So we had a good relationship, even though I didn't like him because he was a big fat slob who pushed weight around and thought who the hell he was. And he stopped talking to me like, like in the beginning, he talked to me like trying to abuse me, but I set him straight right away. And I told him, I said, look, the way you grew up is the same way I grew up. So stop all the tough guy bullshit. And if we're going to do stuff, we're going to work together. We're going to work together. But he still couldn't get it out of him because he was, I'll break his fucking head if he runs over him. All that stupid shit. So anyway, by the end of the meet, I was addicted. I really got into betting sports because that was the football season. And to make a long story really short, by the end of 1972, I had lost over $1 million betting sports. By that time, I was up at Monticello to two different bookmakers. One was Bonnie Cutler, an old retired Meyer Lansky guy who was retired up at Monticello, who was taking action. He was in his late 70s. He was retired up there, but taking action for some of the whatever. And this other lunatic, Cabert, from New Jersey, that my friend hooked me up with when I came back up to Monticello. I asked around, is there any bookmakers around here? In the beginning, they gave me, it was pay or collect. In the beginning, it was just put up the money, because they didn't know who I was. And I put up the money and lost and lost and lost. And then it got to the point where it was pay or collect every Tuesday with both guys, with Barney and with Cabert. So that's what I was doing, little by little, because I paid every week. I had, I had a lot of cash that I had won with Tony between Lincoln Downs, and right from Lincoln Downs, I went to Freehold for 3 months before I got to Monticello. So between them two places, I made a lot of money fixing races. I was into the fixing races thing then, and that's what I did and made a lot of money. But I lost.
I was gonna say, yeah, so you lost a lot of money as well. But I mean, as you got into this much debt, like, I mean, they did just not cut you off, because I mean, they just kept giving you money and money. You got up to that much money.
No, they didn't give me money. And why would they cut me off? I was losing every week and paying. So
you were, consistently paying the whole time.
Yeah, I pay every Tuesday. It was pay or collect, and every Tuesday you never win. And that was a football season. And during the football, nobody ever wins betting football. Every bookmaker will tell you that. If you just take action on football, you'd be a zillionaire if you didn't bet basketball or hockey or baseball. Football, for historically and statistically, the player wins out of 15, 16 games. The player wins maybe 3. And that's just the way it is. You can't win. And that's what was going on there. And I was betting 10, 12 games every Sunday. And it got up to starting with 5,000 and 10,000. And I got up to 20,000 a game, and with both guys. So, I may have on certain games, I may have 40,000 on that game. But even if I bet 20,000 a game, 10,000 with each guy, you bet 10 games. You're talking about betting $250,000 every weekend, which I was doing. So between you win a little, you lose a little, you lose a lot, you win a little, you lose a lot. By the end of the year, I was broke, penniless, and but I was addicted, very, very bad addiction, bad. and I told him, I told Cabert. Cabert was the guy in Jersey. He was a madman. He was part of the Gotti crew. It was Gotti's button guy in New Jersey. I found all this out later, that he killed 17 guys. He was just a madman. Um, I went to Gebert. The other guy, Barney, was good old guy. He was in his early 80s then, I guess. And but I had a girl that was with me, Gina, and she used to go bring him coffee because she would make my payments for me and everything and pay him off. When I lost, I would give her the money. She would go see Barney because she lived in the same complex as Barney, and I would drive down to Jersey and pay Gebert. So they were both making a lot of money. I had lost over $1 million between the both of them. And so I went to Gebert and I told him, I says, listen, I'm going to Florida to buy some property, so I won't be around for 2 or 3 weeks. Knowing he would say, no problem, just call me up and I'll give you the line. And I says, well, if I lose, I won't be here to pay. He says, no problem. And I knew he was going to say that because for the last, 3-4 months, he's got almost $1 million of my money. And he knew my credit was good. He knew I was in the horse business. He knew I was in big action. So anyway, I go to Florida, penniless. And with a dime, you could bet $1 million. And that's just what I did. I called up. I gave me the line every week. And by the end of the third week, I was stuck with each of them. I was stuck almost 800,000, maybe 380, I think, with each guy. And I had to come back because I kept stalling that. He had a closing is next week. And finally, the third week, I had to go back. So I went back. And Gebert had a guy pick me up at the airport. And he says, you want to go home? Because we got to go down and see the man. He says, he's waiting for you. And I says, I got no money. And he says, well, you got a problem. So he calls him up and he says, bring him down here. Gebert says for me to go down there with him tomorrow, the next morning. So I go down there. And then the scene that happened next is like out of The Godfather, in the back of the club there, table sitting with 3 guys, smoking cigars, drinking demi-tasse. And he just gets up. It was in Atlantic Highlands where they have a big boat basin. And he walked out. We followed him. He walked out to his boat, 30, 40-foot boat, whatever it was. And they bring me downstairs. And about a half hour later, the motors get shut off. They're in the middle of the ocean someplace. And I go back upstairs and they put me in a little drum, like a half a 55-gallon drum. They pour a couple of bags of cement, pump some water in there. And then Gebert comes, and he comes right to my face, and he says, Sammy, who was the guy I was betting with, his guy, he says, he let you go too far. That's on him. You went too far, and that's on you. Now you tell me why I shouldn't let this cement harden and throw you the fuck overboard.
Holy shit.
And I says, well, I could pay. And he looks at Sammy. He says he could pay. And Sammy told him, he says, look, the guy's in big action. He paid every week. He lost a lot of money. We made a lot of money with him, so he's in big action. So Gebert says, all right, you could pay. He says, okay. He says, you owe me $380. I think it was $380. I don't remember. He says, I'm going to make this a Shylock loan. 2 points. He says, so every week you come with $7,200 every week, and you miss 1 week, you'll be right back here with no turning back. So that's the same deal I made with Barney, and the bottom line was I had to come up with close to $16,000 every week just in vig, and I still owed the principal. And that's when I had to get real serious about fixing races and making money.
So you were able to eventually manage to pay this debt off, though. I mean, you had a woman help you pay it, didn't you?
Well, what happened was, and then again, we'll skip ahead 5 years. For 5 years, I did everything I had to do, including fixing races at just about every major racetrack in the country, including Belmont and Aqueduct Racetrack, dealing with the top jockeys that race in there. And I did it all with the help of Tony Shula. I set it all up, but Tony Shula showed up at Monticello, and I couldn't chase him because we made a lot of money. And I got a hold of Con Erico, who was an old-time jockey and who knew all the top riders, and we made a deal with him, and we wind up fixing all the races. Now, about 5 years later, Tony Shula, because of his big mouth and everything, he got caught, and he wind up ratting on everybody. And Conorico, he wind up going to jail. He didn't say a word to nobody, and it was Conorico that really could have got me involved. But he didn't. He kept quiet, and Shula wind up going to jail, becoming a government informant. And that's why all of what I put together was brought out in the open, because Shula, who was a part of this, my middleman, he just become a government informant. And it was to skip to what you said. In 1978, I had paid for maybe 3-4 years. I paid 5 times what I owed them, just in vig. And Gina called me up one day and says, Barney's in real bad shape. And Barney was a good guy. That was the Jewish bookmaker. He was a good guy. He kept telling me, Larry, you got to stop. You got to stop. You got to stop. And always trying to be like a father figure to me. But when when you have an addiction, you don't want to hear nothing. You just want to do what you want to do. And you don't even think of the consequences until they're right at you. So she calls me up and says, Barney's in real bad shape. And I went there, and he was in bad shape. And I says, Barney, we're going to take you to the hospital. He says, no. But next day we wind up, she called me up and she says he's having trouble breathing. So I says, I'll be right over, call for an ambulance. So she did. By the time I got there, the ambulance was there, and they took him he died a couple of days later in the hospital. But what happened was, during this time, maybe the day before, he told Gina that he had no family, had nothing, and that in the closet behind move that shelf out of the way, there's a little door there. Open the door, there's a box, and in the box he had a little over $400,000 in cash that he left to Gina, and Gina gave me the money, and I paid off Gabert. I owed him $380, I think, and then me and Gina went to Florida. So that's how I got to. Now there's 5 years of that I left out. How we got to the jockeys, how I got to Conorico, how there's all the good stuff that I left out. But now, if you want to fill it in, we can go back, and I can tell you how I got to the jockeys in New York, all the top jockeys in the world at that time, how much I paid them, how I paid them, where I paid them. And we can get into all of that if you want. I just went from 0 to 100.
No, I know. No. I mean, that's what I'm saying. And because you have so much, stories and stuff. I mean, your whole book, like you said, it's not even covering your whole part of your whole life. So, I mean, that's why, it's good that you got your podcast as well. So you can just go into every single detail and break it down. And
well, my podcast, we started this podcast. We started this podcast because in 2018 or 2017, I got a call from Frank Collada. Frank Collada, I guess you know who he is. He was Spilatro's button guy. And Spilatro, in case your audience don't know, Spilatro and Frank Collada was the 2 guys that from Chicago that they sent to Vegas, and they made the movie Casino about. So Casino was made about, and Pesci, who played Spilatro's part, and I forgot who played. I think Frank Vincent played Frank Collada's part. I'm not sure. But anyway, Frank Collada calls me up and he says, I'm writing another book. He says, do you mind if I put that incident, because they helped me out a lot, which is what we skimmed right over, never even mentioned it. They both did me a big favor in '74, and he says, you mind if I put that incident in my book? And I says, what do I care? So he put what they did, the deal that him and Spilatro had in the book, the deal that made us millions of dollars, and made all of us millions of dollars. But it was never enough where I ever got in one lump sum $300 and something to pay Gebert. And I went to him one time, and I went to Gebert one time and said, listen, I have 100,000. Can we take 100 off the top? And this way I'll just pay you the 2 points on 280 instead of 380. And he said, no. So fuck him. So I never went back to him. I just says, so anyway, so he writes the book, and I run into him again at a wedding in Vegas, California. And he said to me, he says, he says, that article, that chapter I put in the book about what we did in '74, he says, I got asked more about that than anything else.
Damn.
He says, you should write a book about your life. And that's what made me write the book. So I get a hold of Frankie Vincent and all them guys, them actors. They were all the actors that were in there, Pesci and all of them guys. They all grew up together, around my neighborhood. And we wrote the book. And as soon as I wrote the book, they said self-publish it so you own it, and they send it to California. Within a week, I got a call from Sony Pictures and Village Roadshow that they want to do a movie. So they sent for me. I go out there. Within 3 months, we have a contract, and now I have to go to California in February and January of 2020, and we were going to start looking for locations and talk about everything. The contracts are already drawn up. They're drawn. So I go out there and had to come right back because of COVID. So they shut the whole place down with COVID for 2 years. Well, the whole world, COVID. And so by the time COVID was over and California started getting back in action, the option they had on my life story, because they paid me for the option, it ran out, and they asked me to resign. And I told them, I says, listen, I says, I'm 83 years old. I said, if you can get right back and do this, I'll resign. If not, I got to go someplace else. And they said they couldn't promise me, because when they shut down, they had a lot of projects that they were in the middle of that they have to continue. So anyway, I didn't resign. But it was a very short time after that the Vallango brothers, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Green Book.
Mm-hmm.
It was written by Nick and Frank Vallango about their father and this black piano player. They won the Academy Award for the best screenplay and best movie. And it was about my friend, Tony Lip, their father. He was a good friend of mine. And they said they wanted to do. They asked me. They said, we heard you didn't resign. We'd like to do your movie. So so I said, all right. And so they flew into Jersey here, and Frank flew in first, and he stayed with me for a couple of weeks till Nick got here. And then when Nick got here, we started talking about the movie and everything, how we were going to do it, what we were going to do, where, what, everything, and the contracts. And then Frank calls me up one day, and he says, can I stay with you? My brother got to run back to California for a couple of weeks. He says, I don't want to stay. I don't know anybody here. And when he did stay with me when he first got here, we got along well. So I said, sure. So he was supposed to come that Monday. And Monday night came, and he never showed up. Tuesday, I called him, no answer. Wednesday, no answer. Thursday, I get a call. They found him dead in the street in the Bronx. what happened was before he got to me, he picked up a hooker. They went to the Bronx, got some cocaine laced with fentanyl, and died right at the steering wheel of the car. And
Jeez.
so at the funeral and at the wake, at the repast, his brother, after it was all over, at the repast, his brother comes to me, Nick, and he says, look, you got my number. He says, I have to go back to California, straighten all this mess out there. He says, if you need me before I get back to you, just call me. So I said, okay. It was less than a week later, I got a call from Barry O'Brien, who writes for Law and Order. And he wrote probably 20 or 30 TV series, starting with Ally McBeal way back there, but a lot of very good TV series. And he's a very well-respected writer. And he sends for me, and they would do it. This was in April, and they were doing all the L.A. Law and Blue Blood and down in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. So I go to Greenpoint and I meet with him, and he says, I read your book. I want to do a TV series based on your life. So everything started to happen good again, and so we were talking. He says, my writing with Law and Order ends in the middle of April. He says, in May, we'll all hook up, go to California. And I know everybody in all the networks and streaming services, because he wrote so many TV series. He knows everybody. He says, and we'll get this thing bought and we'll do it. So I says, okay. So we were going to go in May. And May 2nd, the writer's strike happened. And the writer's strike is still going on. So while we're waiting for the writer's strike to be over, I'm doing the podcast. The only problem I have doing with my podcast, is that I didn't think I'd be doing it for this long, because originally we were going to do 1 or 2 podcasts, me and Frankie Vincent, to promote the book. But then as soon as the book came out, I got signed right away with Village Roadshow. So we put the podcast aside. Then when when COVID happened, we started up with the podcast again to do an intro into the movie for the movie. And then Frank Valongo died. So now I says, well, we're going to start the podcast again. And then I got in touch with, and then a few months later, I hook up with Barry O'Brien, and then the writer's strike. So now the podcast continues. But I'm 84 years old. I forget a lot. I dribble a lot. I have no idea what podcast, and I didn't have anything structured. So I forget what stories I told from the week before. And it's just, it's amazing. But I get a lot of responses. Because I say, look, folks, I said, after watching this podcast, if you have any questions, please send them in, because it will help me remember and help me fill in some of the gaps. Because I left out 7 years of really good stuff, just talking with you. So
I know.
I get a lot of questions. Now that presents another problem, because I have 1,000 emails that come in, and my friend who films it for me says, yo, you got to answer the emails, otherwise YouTube will get mad. And I'm up all night answering emails, and they're all positive, they're all good. But all of a sudden I created a job for myself, and all I wanted to do is make a movie, make some money, go to Vegas, get a $5,000 a night hooker, and die in bed. That's all I wanted to do. And now I'm up all night. Emails.
Yeah. I mean, that's just, it's all, a whole project in itself, trying to get a movie and all these things happening, and but it looks like you're getting closer and closer as everything is happening. You know what I mean? And I think,
but it's getting late. It's getting late. I'm 84. Yeah. It's getting late. Right, I already passed my life expectancy by 5-6 years. And these guys, they just, okay, now we're going to do this. And they're all in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And, You know,
Right.
if I was at that age, I still would have stayed with some, you know, with Village Roadshow. But it's getting late. You know, I wish I
Yeah.
was your age again. I give my left arm and part of my left leg if I could be your age again and be in this position I am now. Because the life that was just a life to me, there's a lot of people out there that find it very, very exciting. And then because of my involvement with John Gotti and many, many, many mob guys, because of my love for music and the situation between me having the position that I had, and it was only a matter of time before every mob guy in the world knew I was fixing races and paying that kind of vig, and then they all come looking for you. But the worst part about that is that I love music, and music is the only thing that kept me going. Somebody says, if somebody said to me at midnight, we're going to shoot you in the back of the head. If I was listening to music from 11 o'clock until, I wouldn't even think about it. I just get so zoned into the music. I just love music.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
The music was in all the nightclubs, and all the nightclubs back in the 70s and 80s were owned by mob guys. So now you get the best table. Sometimes you don't even get a check, but then if you don't go back, and the guy, a typical night would be, hey, where you been? You haven't been here in 4 or 5 days. I heard you had a couple of winners. You come in here, you get a front table, you never get a check. I never get a fucking call, you know. And then you start getting in, you know, like they're all entitled to know, because they're mob guys. They're all entitled to know when the races that I'm fixing them to stay alive. I'm not fixing them for profit or gain. I'm fixing them to stay alive. I just want to be a legitimate guy. And you know,
Well,
so anyway,
no, and you know, I'll be sure to include your YouTube on there and your book in the video description.
Who knew there was so much to learn about horse race betting and the Mafia? Larry's got one very interesting story. He almost didn't make it out to tell this story though. Please share this interview with anyone that you think will enjoy this type of content. Larry's book is in the video description. I highly recommend his book to anyone that liked this interview and enjoys Mafia related content. Please subscribe to my channel for more interviews like this, and at the end of this video there'll be a playlist that pops up of all my other Mafia related videos. Please be sure to check out my other podcast called A Lifetime of Mafia Tales. I co-host that with Salvatore Polisi, who is in the Colombo crime family. That podcast is on the same YouTube channel. Thank you again for watching, and of course, we'll see you on the next one.